Hey there, everyone. How are we doing today? So, I wanted to put this video together because we are in interesting times. This started 5, 6, 8 weeks ago about a health event. Number of people getting, diagnosed, and all of that stuff, but is very, very quickly turning into an economic story. And I'm starting to see more and more people throw out headlines meant to scare you. The Great Depression, the Great Recession, all of these negative economic headlines. And what I thought I would do is, again, remind you that in crisis, in chaos, there's always opportunities. You need to look for them, you need to work for them. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to go collect some stories about what is going on or who profited in the Great Depression. I think if we do that, we can then look at what they did in unprecedented times, and then maybe how we can go about doing that today. So again, I have examples about a person, total industries, and then a couple of companies. So again, we'll try to relate this to how we can do this today. So the first one is actually an investor, and actually it's an investor I've never heard of. I've been looking at the investment market for the better part of three and a half decades. And to think I didn't know about this investor who wildly profited from the Great Depression is, I don't know, it's insulting to my browser history or something, because this is a story I should have heard about before. So if you've heard about this person before, let me know, because maybe my economics, again, I have an econ degree and an MBA, and I never heard about this investor. Just bad. So his name is Floyd Bostwick Odlum, O-D-L-U-M. Again, never heard of him. But basically, he was a stock market investor pre-Great Depression, predominantly in utilities. That was kind of what he did. But right before the crash, right before the Great Depression started, he and a few of his investors rightly called the top. He didn't call it the top, at least based on my research of him. He just thought that the excess in the market was something that he couldn't understand and wasn't warranted. So he went all cash, like all cash. And he stayed all cash as the Great Depression started. He did not rush back in. And instead of becoming a stock market investor, trying to catch a falling knife and like that, like so many other people did, he pivoted as an investor. And again, pre-Great Depression, he invested in utility stocks mainly. Several years into the Great Depression, Floyd, I'm not going to say his whole name again, Floyd, he started to buy cash-starved businesses. These were businesses that had product, they had customers, but for whatever reason, their cash position was starving them to death. And there were hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses that found themselves in a cash-starved position. Think Gap in today's terms. Gap on Thursday, I believe, said, hey, we're running out of cash. We're not going to pay our rent. We're not going anywhere. Think about that on a much, much bigger scale. And that's where Floyd started to deploy capital. Now, Floyd, in his wisdom, some of the companies he bought, he sold for parts, replenished his capital very quickly. But many of them, he consolidated, made a bigger company. Think consolidating 5 hardware stores, putting it under one umbrella, and then selling that to someone else. So Floyd, again, went cash, didn't try to catch a falling knife in his area of expertise. He changed, and then he went, yes, look up Floyd. It's a great case study. I'd never heard of him. Then he went ahead and started buying cash-starved businesses. I think that is genius. Lots of lessons there, right? If your area of expertise is stocks and the stock market is something that's irrational, he went somewhere else. He obviously went liquid and used that. He didn't go early, didn't catch a falling knife. He sold some for parts to get a quick return. He held others and built. It was just a great story. And there was, in his biography, obviously probably some self patting on the back, he's highlighted as the only investor, only individual investor to profit from the Great Depression. I think that's highly unlikely to be the only one, but again, he is certainly an investor I have never heard of before, and we need to go check him out. So next up is an industry, and this is movie theaters of all things. Movie theaters, if you don't know, had just released what they called talkies in 1927. Was kind of revolutionary, right? So they went from it was a new thing, right, where you could actually watch and hear things that you and I take for granted today. And then the Great Depression kicks off. What happens? Well, disposable income dries up. Movie theaters get less patrons. Lots of movie theaters go out of business. And then what do the ones do to survive going forward? Well, they slashed prices. They slashed prices. They cut them in half. You know something else they did? They started doing 2-for-1 specials, right? Pay for one, get 2 movies. This is interesting because it wasn't quote unquote 2 blockbusters like we talk about today. It was one blockbuster movie. And then the B, right, the second movie, the teaser, it was what they called a B movie. I don't know what that was. Think of it being a cheap movie, something that was put together very, very quickly, very, very cheaply, and then released. In addition to that, they started doing giveaways. You know, they started giving plates and silverware and stuff away to come. They were just trying to make it so they could get repeat customers. So again, there are lots of industries today that have too much supply, right? Think movie theaters again. Lots of them are going to go out of business. You see AMC theaters. I think they just got a $600 million loan. But it's very interesting to think that movie theaters are going to have to change. And then there's the ripple effect to Hollywood. Hollywood may need to change because Hollywood was still making what we call blockbusters, but they spun out an entire new industry creating cheap movies, right? Again, they called them B movies. I don't know what we would call them today. But maybe that's movies for streaming services. I don't know. But I think the time for only blockbusters is over, right? Blockbuster movies. It's just an interesting thing to think about. And again, think about all the other industries. Shoot, coffee stores, right? I mean, coffee. There's coffee places all over the place. I'm betting there won't be as many going forward. There's just lots of industries that could look to what happened to movie theaters and maybe survive and thrive going forward. So I think there's just so many lessons in the Great Depression if we take the time to look at them. Next up, Procter and Gamble. Who would have known? Even in a Great Depression, people need soap, right? Very, Lysol, all those things that you see today, cleaning products going ham. Something that's interesting about Procter and Gamble is they doubled down on marketing. They did new marketing, right? So not only were they doing ads in billboards and in radio stations, but they were sponsoring different radio shows, right? Think about, and they were just building a loyal fan following. So again, there will be some businesses that you and I need today that won't retreat. They won't reverse. They will double down and they will build a brand that will last 100 years. Procter and Gamble, it is still around today. Frankly, I think they released earnings last week, crushed it. They were cemented in the Great Depression. Absolutely. If they didn't do what they did in the Great Depression, they would have just been like any other soap company and not here today, in my opinion. They took the Great Depression, they doubled down on marketing, and they're crushing it today and have been around 100+ years since, or almost 100 years since the Great Depression. Here's a company that I'd never heard of that, again, I think is interesting, and I actually will relate them to Apple, perhaps. I think this company is could be today's Apple or like company. And it was somebody called Martin Guitars, of all things. Again, never heard of him, but did some research. So essentially, Martin Guitars was a high-end producer of guitars when the Great Depression kicked off. And what they did is they did lots of things to make sure that they could stay in business and still be a producer. First and foremost, they cut the work week, right? They were the manufacturer. So they reduced wages, right? Deflation. And then they cut the work week to 3 days, right? So they were still producing. They were still keeping their very, very skilled resources, but they were only working 3 days a week. Another thing they did is they did not yield on pricing, right? They were selling their guitars through retailers, and lots of high-end brands, when times got tough, started discounting. And very, very quickly, they lost their reputation of being a quality product, and they just became another discount guitar maker or instrument maker. But they didn't. They never discounted. Then the other thing they did, and this is the part where I think they're Apple, is they ended up creating new types of guitars that were cheap. So they always kept their high-end brand and the stuff they made going in. But what they did is, as the Depression started, they started creating low-end products. So they didn't destroy their brand. They clearly differentiated. It was clearly a different class. But they kept their reputation. And I thought that was pretty ingenious. I never bothered to look up what happened to Martin Guitars. I'm assuming they eventually got sold to someone else. But they, without question, survived the Great Depression because they didn't discount. They shrunk the creation or the supply of their product, right, from 5 days to 3 days. So there were less products hitting the market. And then they just expanded their product line. How many companies could do that today? I think it is absolutely something that companies should consider. And then that brings me to another industry. This industry had been hit hard because of prohibition. And this is the brewers, right? The people that made beer. And just in case you don't know, the prohibition actually started in 1920 and lasted through 1933. So again, they were already suffering. But what did the brewers do? First off, a lot of them went out of business, obviously. But the ones that stayed around believed that prohibition was a phase. It's a phase that lasted 13 years. But still, they believed it would eventually be repealed. So they had to stay in business. So what did they do? They got creative. They started working in other industries that were kind of similar if you looked at it, right? One being dairy, one being root beer. They started making root beer. They started selling meat, right? They started to expand what they could do just to eke out a profit so that they could survive to the other side. This is the brewers are the classic survive and thrive later, right? Don't judge yourself. Don't stay in your own lane. Let's go somewhere else. So again, there are lots of things that you could do. So again, I wanted to bring up these 5 stories. Again, one individual, Floyd, 2 industries, one being movies, second being breweries, and 2 companies, one being Procter Gamble and the other being Martin Guitars. Because as I tell you all the time, there are so many opportunities in chaos. The best opportunities for me so far was 2010 when everybody was afraid. I think we are very quickly going to get to like that, where 2020, maybe 2021, given how all this forbearance stuff plays out, could be great opportunities. But you have to learn your market. You have to be flexible. You have to survive, the early part so you can thrive later. And heck, we're not in the Great Depression. This is self-induced. We put ourselves and our entire economy in a self-induced coma. This is not a grinding down business cycle with huge impacts. If you don't know what I mean, I did a live stream earlier today about all the negative numbers and metrics from the Great Depression. Truly frightening. So take a listen to that if you want to see. But in the end, ask yourself how you can thrive. This is about moving forward. This is about moving your family forward. There will be lots and lots of businesses and millionaires created by taking advantage of the deals ahead of us. So that's what I got for you. Hope that made sense. Do yourself a favor. If you have time, go check out Floyd. Again, it's an investor I had never heard of, and that's a shame. All right, take care of yourself. Bye.